Hi, and welcome to the Scientist Age Sangha. I'm Nancy Anderson Dolan from Wise Heart Wellness. And tonight's topic, our one-word exploration, is Brules. I did pronounce that correctly. I'm not slurring or anything. It's rules with a B. And it comes from Vishen Lakhiani. And he is a world famous, he has one of the biggest personal development companies in the world. And I was lucky enough to meet him in 2014. And he was sharing a stage with the Dalai Lama. And he was such an interesting man. And he was pretty early in his work at that time. But I actually got to lay my hand on him and just feel him, because that's how I really see how people are. And he feels as real as anyone ever. And he talks about this idea of rules in his book, The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. And it doesn't mean that it is, you become the smartest person on the planet or the, biggest new entrepreneur or things like that. What it really is about is it's talking about letting go of old rules that are sort of stuck in your head. And he calls them rules because he calls them bullshit rules. And I don't know if I can say that on YouTube or not, actually. So we'll just go back to rules. And the idea of it is, though, that they are rules that are accommodated. We just suck them up, and it might be from our families, it might be from our own fears, and it might be from watching other people. It might be from our particular culture or political system or religious system. Or it could just be things we think that we have got figured out in our heads from our experience. And so our experience might be that it feels really bad to be laughed at. And so that we're not going to speak up much, that it's not safe to speak up. Or it might be that we believe that we should be able to do whatever we want and not pay any consequences. Or it could be simple, simple things. Like in my own life, there were a number of different ideas about things like that I had that became those rules for me. One of them was about the way that work should be. And I thought I needed to find a company that would pay me enough to live on and stay with them a really long time. And that did not really work out for me because I just don't have the attention span to stay with the company for a long time. But I came to understand as I went through the process of breaking down that old rule and coming into the idea that my way of working in the world will be very different than most other people's. And that became okay. And it opened up my life in such an amazing way because I didn't try to keep doing it the way I saw other people do it, or the way that I thought that other people did it to do what they wanted to be doing, or like what they wanted to be doing, because I had different factors than other people. And most of us have things like this. I really grew up in a culture that really worshiped thinness. Twiggy was in my era. And my mom had all sorts of books and contraptions and, crazy schemes to lose weight. And so I followed right along in those footsteps. I thought, these are the rules. You either are like that or you are trying to lose weight and be like that. And that really did a lot of damage to my psyche, to my body, to my way of being in the world, those kinds of things. And it actually just about prevented me from finding out there were some health considerations in my body that were creating symptoms, as opposed to, not just being the perfect model looking like. And it really helped when I set all those aside and started just what works for my body. That became my new rule. And the rule has taken me on a long and interesting path that's very unique. And that's the other big thing about the rule thing, is that not everybody's going to have similar ones even. We can have really different ones depending on so many things, our desires, our physiology, our experience. So what I'd really like to pass on to you is this idea of recognizing what those rules might be in your life. What are the things that you might have picked up? And I encourage people in the email that I sent out this week to just start writing some notes about it. And as you go about your day, what might be, in the way. And when we find out in the way, we find out when we're uncomfortable. And so I might go along and feel uncomfortable at a grocery store. And I'm like, what's going on here? It's an old hangover. What if somebody looks in my basket and sees what I'm eating and disapproves of me? Say, oh yeah, that's that old rule there. Or it might be about going to a dentist. I actually have a great dentist, and I don't have big anxiety reactions to dentists anymore. But I really thought going to the dentist was a horrible thing and it had to be painful. And it turns out it doesn't. And changing my ideas about that changed a lot of the outcomes. So they can be woven in all sorts of ways you can't even imagine. I have a lot of friends that talk about honesty. And I thought either you were honest and you said what was on your mind when it was on your mind, or that you were dishonest. And I came to understand that's not a good rule. Not a good rule at all. Lose a lot of friends that way, lots of things. But now I understand that the rule that I have around honesty is a lot more flexible. I thought they were rigid. And as I found out about that, I get a lot of inner guidance about what I'm going to share with somebody. There's a saying about brutal honesty that the only thing your people remember about it is the brutality. And so when I stop and get guidance from inside, it's very different, the kind of honesty I share, than the kind of honesty I might share, or dishonesty actually, when I'm afraid. If I'm afraid of someone's reaction to something, I might be dishonest. That's very different than the discernment that I use in putting forward my opinion or ideas. So these aren't black and white. They're subtle and they're evolving. And it's really interesting to see how they do evolve. I was just listening to some more of Vishen Lakhiani's discussions about this idea, and he was talking about political issues and how important it is for people to be able to discern what are rules and what are rules that we want to follow with this sort of thing, when there is so much fake news and false information and misleading kinds of things out there. And they may be fostered by people we know and care about. And there may be just so much unreal information that leads us to make decisions about what rules we will follow, that it can break down things all over our lives. And so this is not just a insignificant idea. It's important to sift through and find out what is real for you and what is not. And the idea is that some things will hold you back and some things will open you up. And one of the rule of thumbs that he works with is to run it past those ideas. Does this enhance my life? Does this give me guidance that makes it easier to move through the world and still be connected to other people? So rules like, a whole group of people being bad, or the one group of people being better than another group of people, those probably wouldn't make the cut. And it is really helpful to think about when we're thinking in critical ways about the world, or if we're thinking about hopeless ways of the world, that, okay, there are some really Mother Nature rules, I will call them, that the planet is amazingly resilient. But that doesn't mean that we don't make rules about caring for the planet. And we won't agree on all the rules, but we can have our own personal rules. Maybe I am willing to ride my bike all the time instead of drive my car. I may think that should be a rule for everybody, but that's not really very realistic. But I can follow that rule for me, that when I can, I'm going to ride my bike. So this idea of making up rules for ourselves that just make our lives easier, and so we're not making so many decisions over a day. I have a rule for myself that I eat food that is 80% not processed. And this is not a diet. This is not to die because I have lots of body reactions to lots of processed things. And so it's just a really simple rule. It's not perfect. It doesn't prevent all exposures that I might, not do well with, but it helps me move through my life in a simpler and more comfortable way. So I hope I've described that reasonably well to show some of the really broad spectrum of different rules you might look at. Lots of the time, I encourage people to do a chronological viewing of your life. Like, what were the earliest rules that you might have grown up with? One of the rules that I wasn't ever sort of spoken out loud, but I came to pick up was I didn't share a lot about what was going on inside my home, outside my home. And that just felt like it was a rule that was followed but not discussed. And then as I went along, I got into school and I just didn't tell anybody that I didn't understand what was going on because it seemed like a pretty good rule. Because when I did say that, I usually got into trouble. And it wasn't met with assistance, it was met with criticism. And so that rule was a bit of a problem. And of course, it didn't serve me very well in school because there were many things I didn't figure out until adulthood when I was able to change that rule and ask lots of questions. And then things that I had missed because of my attention span, people would point out to me and I'd be able to fit it in the whole picture and make some different rules. So it's really useful to go along like that because lots of things like trauma or certain kinds of things, like even car accidents, they sit in your body and it might cause you to have a rule that you don't even know about. Maybe you're going to step on the brake frequently and suddenly because you're afraid. And that seems to be a good rule of thumb, but it might actually cause you to be in more danger. So these rules can come up in your body throughout your life. And those ideas that might be outmolded as you go along. Right now in our society, people are living a lot longer. And it's interesting to see people's ideas about, okay, the rules are for older people, and the older people are not obeying the rules because it's a very different time and a very different scenario for them. So I encourage you to perhaps try that chronology of what kinds of rules that did you used to have? Do you still follow them? What kinds of rules came up when you got a little bit older? What were some of the rules that you set for yourself, whether they're good or not? Lots of times people think that they have to have a certain level of success, either, physically, in relationships, in business, and there's rules about that. And if they don't make those rules, like I need to be, have a career by the time I'm 24, or I need to be married by the time I'm 27. And those rules can really backfire on them. And so there's really a lot of possibility to make your life a little more open and interesting and flowing, to look at these rules and toss out what doesn't work anymore. Sort of like all those extra socks that you're just sure you're going to find the mate to that clutter your life, your drawers. You can just throw them out, all those rules. So, okay, I'm going to wind this up with a little contemplation. So I'd invite you to get comfortable. And if you're with us live, feel free to quit your screen for a minute, put your feet up, and just start to relax your body. One of nature's rules is that our body works best the more relaxed it is. And so just breathe deeply and slowly. And I'd encourage you to just let your mind wander along that path of chronology from the time you were young. What rules did you first encounter? As a 2-year-old, many of us here know. And just notice when you were a young child, what were the rules around you that were being taught you? Envisioning actual pictures and experiences of when you got a rule that was really set in, whether it was being taught to you or whether it just sprang to mind. A lot of us have really strong body reactions to those early rules. And it might be a feeling of safety, and it might be a feeling of fear if we don't follow that rule. And I'm not going to invite you to change them right now. But as they become conscious to you, you can move through them. And there are some instructions in the email that went out this week. Just to recognize, relax, and play around in imagination to revision. And to actually release. Some people find it very helpful to do some ritual around releasing old rules, because these can be very powerful in our psyches. Something as simple as what you eat for breakfast can become a very, very rigid rule. I often invite people to try vegetables for breakfast, and they're often aghast. You can't do that for breakfast. So the process of just relaxing your body deeply like this and perusing the rules, ones that you've had for a long, long time, or maybe more recent ones. Sometimes when people have lost relationships, a broken up relationship or divorce, they create a rule that they're never going to be in a relationship again. Or if people have invested money and lost it, that they're never going to do that. And while that might be a wise choice, doing it out of fear and making these big, scary, rigid rules often makes our lives narrower and more rigid. Now, if we had no rules, life would be chaotic. Rules help us, like the traffic light rules. If everybody decided to stop obeying the traffic lights, we'd have trouble. Healthy rules like flossing your teeth So we need rules, but we want conscious ones. So as we close, I'm going to invite you to think of a rule that is helpful for you. Might be as simple as you walk your dog every day. Or it might be that you manage your own financial affairs. Or it might be that you keep in touch with your friends. All those rules can be very life enhancing. And just pay attention in your body to how those rules feel. You might feel overwhelmed by the idea of keeping in touch with your friends. And so you might need an adjustment to that. I say those rules that really help us may push us a bit, but there is an overall feeling of kindness, compassion, a security that is not out of fear, but out of affection. So the idea of having rules that are both affectionate, supportive, and compassionate might be new to some people. So I want you to feel this deeply in your body and compare the rules you find if you do a little more exploration on this topic, that chronography of going through from young to old and what rules you've picked up. And you hold them up against this feeling in your body that is, do I feel held and comforted and guided by these rules? If not, they might be a Brule. And we're just going to leave it at that so I don't break any YouTube conventions there. So I will say goodbye to people that are watching this on later when it's running on YouTube, and tell the people that are with me live that we will start the discussion in just a moment. So I am with you. You are with me. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good night.